Hello there again. This is Michael K. Reynolds, and it's Marketing Cafe Live. And today we have a really great topic that we're going to go over. In fact, it's one of my favorite topics. I'm Michael K. Reynolds. I've owned a marketing agency called Global Studio for 23 years, and you can contact me here at globalstudio.com. But today we're going to get to meet a really a wonderful guest that we have, a true expert in the field of Twitter. Now, I feel very blessed. I've got about 107,000 Twitter followers, and that's kind of a big deal for marketing, but that is nothing compared to our guest who has over 300,000 Twitter followers. Figures he's been doing this since about 2008. And additionally, he's what's called a tech influencer. So basically, this social media is his full-time position. He's very well thought of. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and meet Evan Kirstel. Evan, tell us a little bit about what you get to do as your full-time job. I mean, it's kind of a dream for a lot of people.
Michael, I am living the dream. I tell you, I couldn't be a happier man. And by the way, Reno is a very cool place. I got to come down. We got to do some gambling. Funny story once, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, but maybe I shouldn't have. No, just kidding. That was my favorite
was a
lyrics.
Song. Yeah, that was
a song from my favorite Johnny Cash, but I've never been, but always wanted to go. So let's do this. Let's make this happen. But thank you for having me on the show. No, but this is social media is about fun, entertainment, information. Infotainment is maybe a better word for it, and that's why I've managed to build an audience, because I enjoy having fun, being really interesting, and occasionally entertaining. Probably not on this show, I'm afraid, but maybe on other shows.
So how do you actually help people? You work with brands, you work with companies in the tech field, and they say, hey, Evan, we want you to help get our message out and to do it through social media. How do you actually work with people?
Well, I work with a lot of tech brands, very big names that everyone's heard of, like Intel or, AT&T, and the, companies that people know and love. But I help, despite them having a massive presence online and otherwise, I still have this big audience that I can bring to them. And together we create content together, and we help blow up social media. I act as an industry observer / analyst. I'm a content creator, and I amplify things that they're doing in a pretty big way on places like Twitter, but also LinkedIn and Instagram and Clubhouse and these other fun platforms. And it's a very collaborative style relationship, including lots of startups who, frankly, are lost on social media, so really need help getting share of voice, getting a presence, getting seen and heard.
Yeah, so not only is Evan really well thought of professionally and really good at what he does, but he's also very well liked. And I think that that's really a huge thing on social media, is actually to be likable and for people to want to help you out. And Evan, my experience with you in our relationships, you're an encourager, you're a supporter. And I think that if I was to share, I think that's part of your winning strategy in everything you do, along with a lot of technical suggestions and ideas and thoughts. And we're going to talk about those together. So this is...
Yeah, and I think just to interject, I mean, most people think, an influencer, a social media person is kind of a narcissist, which is often true. But I think to be successful ultimately in the long game in social is about putting a spotlight on other people. So most of my feed is not about myself. It's not me with the selfie thing. It's not me with the camera on me. It's putting a spotlight on people who are interesting, doing interesting work, or doing even heroic work, doctors and nurses, or, trending stories that are, fascinating and adding my color commentary. So, don't make social media about yourself, make it about others, and you'll really will succeed. Thanks for letting me share that little nugget.
So basically you can be an influencer and you don't have to spend $5,000 on your purses or your shoes. So that's...
I don't have purses. I don't have high heels. I have no makeup or beauty products to sell.
Yeah,
just ideas. Just ideas. Yes.
So this is the Marketing Cafe Live, and we do these once a week. And each of these sessions goes into the Marketing Cafe Academy. It's totally free. You'll be able to connect there by going to marketingcafe.club, and you'll see we've got a bunch of great ones. But very excited about Twitter. Twitter is my social media app of choice. I like a bunch of them, and I have to say I like Clubhouse a lot, which the Marketing Cafe is big on Clubhouse, and I see you on Clubhouse as well. But Twitter is kind of the big one for me. And so let's get into some strategies, some thoughts, some ideas. First of all, how would you describe Twitter in regards to all of the other ones that are out there? How do you see its kind of its unique niche, and how it can be used for business owners?
Well, it really is an open forum for ideas and for content and engagement. It's pretty unique. I mean, there isn't another platform like it, and every platform has its opportunities and challenges. But in terms of, sharing and creating and distilling and amplifying ideas in a very open way, I don't find any other platform does that. And it really is through tools like Twitter search and hashtags. You have the ability to narrowcast and to really build an audience, a community based on a set of interests that are specific to you. And there's no other platform that has that kind of format or flexibility, I find. So Twitter is, for me, just one bow in the arrow in the quiver, as it were, but it is an important one together with LinkedIn and Instagram.
So if you were having a business owner start a Twitter feed or a company and they say maybe they've been ignoring it for a while, they're ready to take it to the next level, what would be your overall counsel to them in terms of what you should post on Twitter and tied to your brand, what you shouldn't? I mean, what would be your overall recommendations for them coming in?
I would say don't post anything until you've listened, and you've listened to communities that are relevant and of interest to you. Maybe listen to potential customers, listen to your competitors, listen to thought leaders in your space, in your industry, follow key hashtags. If you're in the concrete business or you're in the space tech business, there are communities tweeting, posting, blogging, sharing, asking questions around those keywords and hashtags. So listen first, understand the landscape, who's who in the zoo, and then start engaging in a very focused way with individuals who are influential. And if you can build relationships with influential voices, whether they're business folks or whether they're analysts or journalists or media or CIOs or whoever those folks are, you can network with them and get their engagement. Maybe they follow you back, and you can slowly build your own sort of brand and identity on the network. So it's not about just post and blog and push, but really listen and engage, and the rest will kind of follow naturally.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's so much in marketing that I think a lot of people think that it's automated, it's technical, it's this thing where you'll just post, all of these things will happen. But in all marketing and with social media, it gets back to relationships and building relationships. And I think the more that things are automated, the more that it comes back to ultimately it's these relationships that are formed throughout the technology. And I think that's the same with social media. It sounds like you do as well.
Yeah, and there's a role for automation. I use automation. Many of my posts are automated, but it's not either or. I then go on top of the automation. I go into the Twitter client, and I'm listening and engaging and replying and liking and sharing content that's personal and relevant to me and my business and my clients, and connecting. Ultimately, it's about being a connector and connecting and meeting new people. And what a fantastic way, open network kind of way to meet new people. Some of those people might turn out to be clients.
Now, you mentioned the word hashtags a few times. What would be your best recommendations for how people could really use hashtags, and maybe some ways that people aren't familiar with, but that are excellent ways to use it as well?
Yeah, well, I know Chris Messina, the inventor of the hashtag. He's actually on Twitter. You can go follow him and chat with him. But hashtags have been a way to kind of open source identify content categories across the internet, not just on Twitter, but now on LinkedIn and Instagram. On really every platform now has supports hashtags, and it's a way uh, to find content that's relevant and meaningful, and to tag content so it gets seen by your target audience. And so I would start by researching and identifying about 6 hashtags that are relevant to you and your business, and really almost on a daily basis, if not hourly basis, who is sharing content on those hashtags and why, and what are their goals and objectives, and then following those people, engaging with them, and in turn posting content on those hashtags that might be relevant to that audience. So it's the ultimate connector of ideas to people. And hashtags for me, I'm really interested in 5G, in health tech, in hashtag telecom, and hashtag cloud. And so everyone posting on those hashtags is potentially a part of my community. They're potentially a collaborator, maybe a client, maybe a competitor, who knows? But there is some degree of relevance to me.
So both you and I, we started in Twitter a long time ago. I was 2009. I think you think it's probably 2008 for you as well. So in the early days, there was this thing you're going to recognize. Yes, it's the fail whale. We remember that. Twitter used to shut down a lot back in the day, and so there's a lot of jokes about the fail whale. But looking back at the early days of Twitter to now, what do you see as the biggest changes from a perspective of using it for business?
Well, there's so much has changed, but we moved from a text-based platform to a text plus pictures and image-based platform to a true multimodal, multimedia platform with live video, live audio, video clips, video streaming. It really has embraced all of these different modalities. Twitter is going to be a publisher. You're going to be able to publish full blog posts on Twitter beyond the 280 characters. So it's turned into a publisher as well as a platform and a content engine. So it's become, really all inclusive. It's synonymous with me with like the internet now. So it's much less about what it started as, which was like a short form text messaging service.
Yeah, I remember it was 120 characters to start. And so you had to really pick your words carefully. And then suddenly it was 240. And that was a lot, after having to write for 120 characters. And one of my favorite quotes, I think it's Mark Twain, who said, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time." I think there's an art form in writing shorter, more brief, and to the point. And I think that was a lot of what people appreciated, is you could have all these thoughts kind of streaming and coming through. And that was kind of the exciting part about Twitter in the early days. All right, so we're going to talk about probably the biggest thing on anybody's mind listening in right now. So they may be at 2,000 followers, 3,000 followers, maybe they have 10,000. You've got over 300,000. So big question everyone has is, okay, how did you build that audience, and what would be your recommendations and your ideas for them to build their audience as well?
Yeah, I'd say number one is patience. I've been doing this for over a decade, as have you. There aren't shortcuts. There are tricks and hacks and some techniques and ways to cut corners, but there's no silver bullet to building that audience. So number one, patience. Play the long game. You're not going to get exponential kind of growth in followers on Twitter. The platform itself has kind of peaked in terms of number of monthly active users. So it's just not a hyper growth environment anymore. So you have to shift from keep having that as a goal, to having more meaningful engagement on Twitter, not building an audience of hundreds of thousands, but building a community of a few thousand loyal and engaged and active followers. And then translate that into getting those folks off of Twitter onto your platform, your mailing list, your your connection on LinkedIn in parallel, or opting them into some kind of newsletter, or so Twitter, think of Twitter as a funnel to create meaningful relationships and then take those relationships off platform, maybe to a real life event, maybe an in-person meeting, maybe it's your own mailing list, but think of it as a tool, top of the funnel, to get to that next step, to that landing page, whatever, and not necessarily a way to build an empire. I don't think anyone is building empires anymore on Twitter. They're building empires on Snapchat, or they're going off to new destinations, or Web 3.0 is coming. But that doesn't mean there aren't amazing opportunities on Twitter. It's not a numbers game anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you shared that. And here is probably the best tip I have for anyone to build a huge audience really quickly is to be famous. So if you're already famous, you can come on Twitter, you can grow a huge audience really quickly. For the rest of us, it is, like you said, it's a lot of hard work. And back in the early days, one of the things I loved about Twitter was something that they regulated was it was really good to build very specific niche audiences in different categories. And so originally there was a follow back strategy where you would go and if you had people you're really interested in a particular cycle, you would follow them, they'd follow you back, and then give them a certain amount of time that if they weren't interested in having a conversation, you would unfollow them. And there was great tools that helped out to accelerate that process. And then pretty much Twitter banned all of that, and there were issues. I remember I learned the lesson the hard way very early on. I had the perfect name for my company, Global Studio, and then that got suspended. And then back then they had no help. There was you couldn't do anything. You were just doomed. And so, so you had to be patient. But I agree with you. I think that the days of where you could really rapidly grow, you could really build an audience, and this wasn't spamming. It was actually building really targeted audiences. I think it was unparalleled. Now it's a lot about providing the content and continuing, I think, build the engagement. You use the word engagement is so important. And here's the thing. I mean, Evan's got 300,000. A lot of them, I believe, are in the tech industry. So you're already really focused. One of the things that I struggled with is I used it for my writing early days, and that I was exclusively going to do it the writing. Then I shifted to business, and then I had other interests as well. And you lose a little bit of that engagement and focus in the strategy that I took. And how I know this is I would have other fellow individuals who would talk about, like, the Steelers, and they had a very targeted audience. They only had like 5,000 followers, but they would get so much more action on the articles than I would because they had been exclusively in that audience. So I think the key today is, I'm agreeing with you, is you're not going to get massive or organic growth just by posting content and you're going to have a gazillion followers. The key is really to kind of build that engagement and really have people active. Because again, I've seen groups with much smaller audiences get much more out of Twitter, and that's kind of the key.
Yeah, and again, it's a human communications platform. So I spend as much time DMing people as I do tweeting, and not in a unsolicited spam way, but in just questions or comments, or hey, let's connect, or I enjoyed that last tweet. And so Twitter is a fully featured messaging platform, as is Instagram and LinkedIn. And you can really build relationships and partnerships and client relationships with the power of DM, the direct message, if it's used sincerely and in a meaningful way. So I have as much going on the back end hidden from viewers. I'm on DM groups like with yourself on different topics, from marketing to technology and other topics. And we're collaborating and sharing and having fun behind the scenes. So again, there are many scenarios and use cases for Twitter that go beyond just pushing out content, and be creative, whether it's using the voice tweet feature or audio Twitter Spaces or direct messaging groups. There are lots of functionality there to explore.
Yeah, in the early days, there was basically you ignored DMs because direct messaging in the beginning, they had all kinds of automated programs and you would just be spammed like crazy in the DMs. And Twitter worked really hard, and I think successfully, to clean up the DMs. And you're right, that's really where a lot of the power is to contact people directly through their DMs, build these communities of DMs where you support each other in sharing tweets and reading and engaging. And so I think there's really huge value. Wasn't always the case. There was a time where I think the Twitter DM box was a joke, but that was many years ago. And you're right, it's really huge. Well, you touched on another piece of technology, which is Twitter Spaces. I'm very much into Clubhouse, very active, have jumped in with both feet. I see that you're in there and you're doing really well in Clubhouse too as well. What's your thoughts on Twitter Spaces?
Yeah, it's another modality that's just a great way to consume content. Many of us are audiophiles. We love podcasts, we love audiobooks. And so this is the Twitter equivalent of a real-time live group audio chat. And there are people chatting. You know, back in the 80s, you had telephone chat lines, and probably people have no idea what they were. But people are chatting and talking to each other in real time on Twitter on every conceivable topic. And you can, in turn, create audio chat groups and invite people. And it's amazing when you put a voice to the handle, to the name. You can really build a much more intimate connection to your followers or to potential followers than you could otherwise. So I'm a huge fan of voice. It's quite a phenomenon in Clubhouse. Twitter has basically copied Clubhouse and is growing it to at a phenomenal rate. I mean, there are journalists on there and broadcasters and sports fans basically 24/7 now on Spaces, and it's just a fun way to engage, kind of like talk radio back in the day when you could listen to a show and call in and other callers would hear you, and that's kind of what's old is new again.
So you have been on both Clubhouse and active on Twitter Spaces, and if someone say, look, I've only got time for one, what would be your recommendation? Should they go in on Clubhouse or should they go in Twitter Spaces?
Make more time. You got to taste these things. You got to sample all the things. Find out what works for you, what your likes, your preferences are. Some people don't want another app. Other people find certain clubs on Clubhouse are really unique, as do I. And so I want to focus on one or two clubs. So it really just depends. Experiment. It's like podcasts. Well, how do you pick two podcasts? Well, you don't. You probably have 20 podcasts that you listen to. So find those groups, those clubs, and join in. And it's a very interactive forum, and have fun. And you can record it. If you're a content creator like myself, both on Clubhouse and Spaces, you can record quote unquote shows that are essentially become your own sort of podcast that you can distribute elsewhere. So lots of opportunity for creators to be creative.
I love that. Make some more time, because you really should kind of test things out in the beginning, and then
at least if you're a marketer. I mean, look, there are so many marketers who have a million opinions on things they've never actually done themselves. I mean, you'd be shocked how many CMOs don't actually have Twitter profiles. But I see it, and you got to make time to experiment, get your feet wet, and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Now, someone who has as many followers as you have, are you going to have 300,000 people come to your Twitter Spaces broadcast? I mean, how does that actually work? And are any strategies you've come up with to at least draw a decent audience?
No, I think there's no silver bullet there. I mean, with anything, any post only gets 2 or 3% engagement, right? I mean, that's sort of the rule of thumb on Twitter for posting, and any club only gets 2 or 3 maybe percent of your audience joining. So these things are sort of metrics you got to build in, and it's all algorithmically based as well in terms of how the algorithm sees and views that space and wants to share it with more people. So one great idea is to partner. Have some collaborators where 4, 5, 6, 10 of you start a space and sort of bring your own audiences along. But yeah, there's no hard fad. Consistency as well. I mean, the Tech News Around the World show that happens on Spaces every day, um, has hundreds of people joining from around the world to discuss trending tech news. And that's after, 9 months of consistently every day, 6 days a week, having a show. So consistency is really important when it comes to any kind of content or content creation or clubs or shows or what have you.
I think that's huge. It's consistency, and then you have to put with that managing expectations. I remember back in the early day when social media was kind of new and there was springing up like mushrooms, these social media companies that's all they did. And they were telling, oh, you don't need websites anymore. You don't need this. You make posts, there'll be thousands of people buying your products and stuff. And so there was a lot of false expectations about it. But the long strategy, being consistent, I think is great, great recommendation. So other exciting thing is you can now live stream on Twitter. Talk about this.
Well, it's basically what we're doing now. There are third-party tools that allow you to connect to your Twitter account to those tools like StreamYard, or right from the device, right from the handset, you can initiate a live stream and live broadcast to your audience. And it's kind of a secret superpower of all the platforms, but in particular Twitter, that most people don't know or don't use or know about. This is back when Twitter bought Periscope, and now it's fully integrated into the Twitter app. Periscope has kind of disappeared, but the functionality is there. So think about being a news reporter, thinking about having your own show live in the field, or if you have something to say, turn the camera around and put it on yourself or interview someone, whatever the format. It's a great opportunity to create content on the fly, and the algorithm loves it. The algorithm loves live content, so it will show it to a much wider audience than pre-recorded or canned video.
Yeah, a lot of people don't remember that Periscope was one of the first live streaming tools that you could use, and pretty amazing thing. And like a lot of these, they have this huge, everybody's talking about it. It's huge, and then people run off to the next best thing. But I think it was a great thing that Twitter purchased Periscope, and that's a feature that's on there as well. And the idea of you can just go live and do things at any time is really great. Well, probably one of the most important things that people want to do with any of their social media is to build communities. What are your unique strategies on building a community, and in particular through Twitter?
Yeah, I think it's to look at a certain percentage of your audience who will over time turn into fans, real fans, and supporters, enthusiasts, whatever you want to call them. And those folks should be treated a little special, a little differently than just any old follower. And over time, it's that community that will really deliver for you. It's not the 300,000 followers I have. It's the 1,500 real collaborators, enthusiasts, folks who retweet me daily and who I built either an in-person or an online relationship with over a decade. And that community should be nurtured. I have groups both on Twitter and off Twitter. I'm on WhatsApp and on other platforms where I nurture that community and I reward that community. What do I mean? Well, I retweet them, I comment, I share their content, like yourself, Michael. And I even have my own crypto. My coin is called B2B. It's based on the Rally blockchain, and I frequently give that to many of my community members and fans as giveaways or prizes or rewards and what have you. So nurturing that community, whether it's 10 people or 100 or 1,000, will deliver the kind of results you're looking for business-wise versus just going after the numbers and the impressions.
It's such a key statistic that Evan put out there, because remember, with any of these social media, and I, for me, Twitter, I would explain it that it's basically a bench in front of a stream that occasionally someone walks up and they sit in the bench and they watch the twigs go by. They're not sitting in the bench very often. And when they are, they're not really paying attention to the twigs all that often. And so the idea that you've got 300,000 followers, you're going to post something, and then 300,000 people are suddenly going to buy something is what gets people, I think, frustrated, because they have these unrealistic expectations of what it could do. But what was really interesting was Evan sharing 300,000 followers, and of those, the core, and you do the math, it's pretty small percentage, is 1,500. But with that 1,500, Evan can rule the tech world in a lot of ways, and he's known as a tech influencer. So that should be maybe discouraging to some, but I think it should be encouraging in that even as you're getting going, focus on those 1,500, the core people, build those relationships one at a time, work together with people, because Evan does this probably better than anyone else, which is to really leverage that core community. And I think that's probably the best suggestion you have in all of this.
Yeah, and it's leveraging it. It's starting an email newsletter. I started with the Twitter built-in newsletter feature from Review, a company they bought, and you can actually launch a newsletter via Twitter now. And I had 20,000 of those 320,000 followers opt in to my newsletter. So whenever I write a newsletter on tech topics weekly, let's say, it goes directly to the inbox of those 20,000. And they in turn can see all the tweets and can in turn share them or like or bookmark them as well. So again, think creatively how to engage your audience beyond just pushing out content to them, but bringing them into the fold, bringing them into your, into your wheelhouse. And how about this, talking to them? We're actually doing a one-on-one. We're looking at each other. We're talking. I invite my favorite followers to do video live streams all the time, really daily at this point. And guess what? Many of them turn into clients or are clients. So this is the new world of selling, social selling, and marketing.
Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago that you sent me a direct message and said, "Hey, we ought to connect. We ought to connect sometime." So I thank you for making that connection, and you've been a great friend on Twitter for me. You talked about the newsletter. Have you worked with Medium at all? Because that's another purchase that Twitter made, and there was some belief that, okay, if you got a bunch of followers, you get on Medium, that's going to really help your blog. Do you have any experience with Medium?
I don't think Twitter purchased Medium. I know Ev Williams of Twitter fame was the CEO at Medium. But, the beauty of the current email newsletter feature from Review on Twitter, it's on your profile. So if someone's looking in my feed or at my profile, they can literally click and subscribe in one button push, and I get their email, which is pretty cool. LinkedIn has a similar functionality. It's called the LinkedIn newsletter feature, where you can build a newsletter from your LinkedIn connections. And again, it's just, how many ways can you touch a potential prospect, customer, social media user? I'd advise at least 4, 5, 6 ways. But these are just some of the newer tactics, and definitely check it out.
So one of the big questions people have is, how often should I be posting? What is too much? Do you have an opinion on that?
Too much is what I've done, which is over 1 million times I've tweeted over the years. So I'll let you do the math on what that turns out to. But, there really isn't too much or too little. It's what your audience expects. And my audience now expects this ridiculous stream of consciousness and tweets, and which is silly. It's way overkill, but it's just what my thing. But I think the reality is they don't see it all, right? On that stream, I love that stream analogy. They see 2% of it. So on Twitter, because it's a stream and there's a constant stream of info, they're not overwhelmed by my million tweets. LinkedIn's a different phenomenon. It's more like a Facebook kind of model. So you will annoy your LinkedIn connections with that amount of content. But yeah, have fun. Whatever you think works for you. There's no hard and fast rule.
Well, this has been great. And so the good news, if you only caught part of this, is that the full replay will be available in the Marketing Cafe, and you can get there by marketingcafe.club, and you'll see the Marketing Cafe Academy. Again, it's totally free, but we put the full replays in there. for those. And I do have one last question for you before we let you go. You mentioned building your audience offline from Twitter. What was your best strategy to get Twitter followers and to convert them into an email address to where you can actually own that contact? Whereas Twitter, we don't really own those contacts, but if we can get the email address, then we can control the conversation. What's your best tip for converting a Twitter follower to an email address?
Yeah, you get that review feature, get that on your profile, and people who find your content interesting will just naturally opt in. And you can even ask them, say, "Hey, would you join my newsletter?" Or so you're actually giving them something, a free newsletter, and you're getting something in return, their email. And so that's a fair trade, and they can unsubscribe anytime. It's all self-service if they like. But that's how I built my email list as well as my newsletter list.
Well, I knew that this would be really great, and it was Marketing Cafe Live. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to connect with Evan, you can sign up for his Twitter newsletter. You can also go directly to Evan. Thank you very much for being part of this. This has been fantastic.
Long overdue. Look forward to my next trip.
Thanks. All right. Well, yeah, see you in Reno. So that's it today for Marketing Cafe Live. And again, if you go to marketingcafe.club, you'll be able to have access to our Marketing Cafe Academy, which is totally free. And we do this once a week. We have great topics, amazing people like Evan. So that's it for today. And we will see you next time in the Marketing Cafe. Thank you.